You think only Americans boycott foreign goods. Think again. In 2025, Canada is showing the world that they too know how to vote with their wallets.
Yes, I mean, I'm not buying anything American anymore.
Yes.
I stopped about 2 weeks ago.
No protest signs, no marches in the streets. They simply stopped buying, stopped eating, stopped walking into American chains that once blanketed their cities like gas stations. The result, U.S. restaurants once thought to be untouchable are now quietly removing signs and pulling out, and ironically, it's Americans who are feeling the consequences first. Today, let's expose 10 major American fast food chains that are retreating from the Canadian market, shutting down locations, and dragging a silent economic crisis back onto American soil. This video does not promote division or encourage any form of boycott. Our sole purpose is to analyze, reflect, and open up a necessary conversation about the changes we're witnessing. Now let's begin with the first name on the list. 1. McDonald's. If you happen to pass by a familiar fast food joint in downtown Toronto or Vancouver, you might feel like something's missing. Not the food, but the atmosphere. There's still customers during peak hours, but the usual crowds are gone. More empty seats, more employees waiting around than working. That buzz of activity, once the heartbeat of the city, has now been replaced by a strange, unfamiliar silence. And that silence is no accident. It stems from something deeper. Canadian consumers are losing trust, and they're choosing to respond not with protests, but with indifference.
I'm starting with my family and also forward the whole message for my colleagues and friends. Please stick to the Canadian products.
According to a 2024 survey by Field Agent Canada, over 53% of Canadians admitted they actively avoid American brands when a local alternative is available. No slogans, no noise. But when hundreds of thousands of people quietly choose to walk away, even systems once thought unshakable begin to fracture. In Quebec, local restaurant chains are reporting surging sales. A&W Harvey's are drawing in a wave of customers who were once loyal fans of that iconic golden brand. Even schools are switching lunch providers to domestic companies not because of taste, but because of trust. Think it's just a Canadian issue. The consequences are quietly bouncing back across the border. As revenue drops, supply lines from the U.S. are being forced to shrink. In Idaho and Nebraska, potato processing plants have reduced capacity by 20%. A packaging plant in Missouri has had to cancel its weekend shifts, and the already fragile beef supply chain is now facing the largest inventory buildup it's seen in years. One burger rejected in Vancouver might mean layoffs at a cattle ranch in Texas. A canceled contract in Ontario could rock a small business in Illinois. Boycotts don't always require banners. Sometimes all it takes is a few million people quietly going elsewhere. And Americans thousands of miles away are left to bear the consequences in grocery bills and gas prices or in that next visit to their favorite diner. And McDonald's isn't alone. Another brand once considered a refuge for tired days is now quietly suffering the same fate. Quiet but heavy with meaning. 2. Starbucks. Some brands don't just sell products, they sell a feeling. A morning cup of coffee once gave millions of Canadians the sense that everything's going to be okay. Cozy stores, familiar corners, and the sound of baristas calling out personalized drink orders all came together to create a sense of warmth and safety. But now that feeling is slowly fading. There's been no official statement, no boycott posters. Yet in Calgary, Vancouver, and Montreal, customer numbers have been dropping week after week. Many locations that were once packed are now cutting back their hours. A few have quietly shut their doors, no announcements, no press releases, just dusty windows and empty signboards removed in silence. Canadians aren't shouting or protesting. They're simply buying their coffee elsewhere. They're choosing silence, but it's a silence that speaks volumes. A mid-2025 independent survey found that favorability toward American coffee brands has dropped by up to 38% in major urban centers. More importantly, this wave of quiet rejection isn't just hurting cafes in Canada, it's creating fractures throughout the US supply chain. Coffee beans roasted in Chicago aren't being shipped out as often. label printing companies in Pennsylvania are seeing fewer orders. A plastic lid manufacturer in Ohio just announced a 25% workforce reduction, citing a downturn in demand from the northern market. It might seem like a neighbor's decision shouldn't affect everyday life in America. But then you realize the next time you grab a cup of coffee, it's 15 cents more expensive, not because of ingredients, but because the market for it is shrinking. One lost market can trigger a domino effect. And Americans, though unrelated to Canada's consumer choices, are now bearing the consequences of that vanished demand. It shows up in every bill, every slashed bonus, every new store closing announcement. And if you think the coffee industry is an isolated case, just wait until you see what's happening to a fast food chain once famous for its perfectly square burgers, now left wide-eyed in the face of an unexpected downturn. 3. Wendys. There was once a fast food chain proud of being different, no round burgers, no following the crowd, always staying square in its own unique way. But in the silent wave of Canadian consumer boycotts, that very difference has unexpectedly become a weakness. In cities like Edmonton and Halifax, Canadian consumers have started asking a simple question: why continue supporting an American chain when local options are just as tasty and, more importantly, free from any emotional baggage or associations with foreign discontent? The answer increasingly is they don't. In the first quarter of 2025, Wendys reported a 17% decline in customer traffic across its Canadian market. Some outlets in major shopping centers have remained shuttered for entire weeks, just to save on operating costs. Prime retail locations now hang up for lease signs. But the true impact isn't in Canada, it's in the local communities of the United States. Because those square burgers aren't just made on site. They rely on a vast supply chain headquartered across the American Midwest. Factories in Indiana and Kentucky responsible for buns and Wendy's signature sauces have started receiving fewer orders. Logistics hubs in Arkansas are also reporting sharp reductions in shipment volumes. In a small town near Des Moines, Iowa, where nearly 40% of jobs depend on a warehouse that supplies ingredients, for the chain workers are nervously awaiting news of shift reorganizations. There haven't been mass layoffs yet, but rolling furloughs have begun. It's the kind of damage control everyone knows signals something worse on the horizon. For American consumers, the ripple effects are starting to show up on their receipts. Classic combo meals now cost a bit more discounts, and promos have become rarer, and even the large fries have been trimmed down, now offered in just 3 official price tiers. The stated reason: rising supply chain costs. But the real cause lies further north with the loss of the Canadian market. A skipped burger in Canada can trigger a supply chain slowdown stretching hundreds of miles across the US, and with it cuts delays and growing uncertainty. What was once the signature quirk of a beloved brand has quietly turned into a burden no one wants to carry. Yet there's another chain once considered the essential guest at every family gathering that is now facing the darkest days in its history. 4. Pizza Hut. Picture this: you're a pizza shop owner in Ontario, Canada. Each morning you open up, arrange the tables, and fire up the oven, but then you just stand there watching the clock tick as the doorbell barely rings anymore. Orders are sparse, regulars stop coming, and ironically, if you're Canadian, you don't even feel that upset because you too have joined the quiet boycott of American brands, even if it means your own store might shut down. That's the reality now facing one of the most iconic pizza chains, so familiar that people used to order from it without a second thought. But in 2025, Canada's buy local first consumer wave has spread like a new habit. No protests, no hostility, but also no more blind loyalty. The customer exodus has been gentle, but it's left deep cracks in the operations of what was once a pizza empire. As the Canadian branch declines, the consequences don't stay in Canada. They travel quickly to warehouses and packaging lines in Arkansas, which once operated 24/7 to supply all of North America. Now 3 of 7 lines have halted daytime shifts. In Wisconsin, a factory specializing in cheese ingredients solely for Canadian orders just issued unpaid leave notices to all contract workers for the next 3 months. The cruel twist. It's American workers unaware of Canada's quiet boycott who are taking the first hit. What do they notice? Suddenly, pizza combos come with fewer toppings, the boxes are smaller, and prices creep up by a few dollars. But the reason isn't rising ingredient costs, it's the disappearance of an entire northern market, and the resulting losses must now be absorbed slice by slice. In parts of the Midwest, Pizza Hut delivery drivers are seeing reduced hours and chaotic shift changes. Long-haul truckers who once transported flour packaging and frozen ingredients for the chain now drive back home with empty trailers. Canadians didn't need to shut down Pizza Hut, they just had to stop showing up. And that silence was loud enough to shake the system from bustling Toronto to small-town America, where every job still matters. And are you ready to face the reality that one of America's go-to brands for family dinner night can no longer guarantee its place at the table, KFC? You don't need a revenue chart to see what's happening. Just walk into any shopping mall in Toronto these days. The usual aroma of crispy fried chicken gone. In its place, an empty counter, distracted staff wiping down trays, and a digital menu looping through just a few basic items. Something has broken not in flavor, but in the emotional connection between Canadian consumers and a brand once seen as the symbol of a hearty, convenient, fast food meal. A recent report from the Ontario Consumer Council made it clear over 60% of Canadians aged 25-45 now actively prioritize local brands when dining out. And among them, once dominant American chains are quietly disappearing from weekly spending habits. For fried chicken chains that heavily rely on the Canadian market, this shift has landed like a direct hit. But it's not just about losing customers. The real problem is this: as sales decline, entire American supply chains are shrinking with them. In Georgia and Alabama, regions known for poultry farming producers now face a grim dilemma. Chickens are raised but not sold, and slaughterhouses are operating at a fraction of capacity. A processing plant in Mississippi has had to freeze its second production line due to a sharp drop in orders from the north. The ripple effect extends far beyond food. It touches advertising, logistics, and retail. In Nashville, an advertising firm that used to handle all of KFC Canada's campaigns just laid off 18 employees after the contract was abruptly canceled. Truck drivers who once hauled frozen chicken from Arkansas to the Canadian border have switched to transporting dry goods, a far less profitable route. In south-central states like Missouri and Oklahoma, residents are starting to notice a strange trend. Their favorite crispy chicken combos are shrinking even as prices creep higher. The official explanation: supply chain adjustments. But what is that adjustment if not the quiet rejection from Canadian diners? One skipped combo meal in Saskatchewan, and somehow the cost shows up on your family dinner in Arkansas. It raises a haunting, unspoken question: if the fall of just one market can make today's drumstick 50% more expensive, what happens when another American icon begins to crumble next? 6. Subway. It's nothing complicated: a few slices of bread, some fresh veggies, a bit of cold cuts, and a drizzle of sauce. Subway was once the perfect model of a quick, healthy, no-fuss lunch. But even that simple formula no longer wins over Canadian hearts. In early 2025, an internal survey at major shopping centers in Montreal and Winnipeg revealed that repeat customer visits to Subway had dropped by 22%. Interestingly, these customers weren't complaining about the food quality, they simply stopped coming, quietly shifting to local alternatives at similar price points. No outrage, no complaints. Just a cold, calculated message being sent through silence. And of course, the impact goes far beyond declining sales. Subway, the world's largest franchising network, is now undergoing a quiet but clear restructuring. Some locations in Canada have scaled back to part-time operations, opening only during lunch hours. Several suburban branches have terminated their leases early. And with the supply chain still heavily reliant on US-based sourcing, Every loss up north is now pushing prices up for consumers down south. A bread supplier in Ohio, which once ran 6 days a week to serve the North American market, has now cut 2 production days. A vegetable packing plant in North Carolina was forced to shut down temporarily in April due to a lack of orders. And a digital menu design firm in Minnesota lost a major advertising contract after Subway Canada abruptly slashed its marketing budget. The result, Americans are starting to feel this quiet retreat where it hurts most in their wallets. The classic buy one, get one free promos gone. The wide range of toppings narrowed down. Even the vegetable portions in each sandwich have been trimmed to optimize costs. In many suburban neighborhoods where Subway used to be the only fast lunch option, the closure of a single store sets off a chain reaction. Students must travel farther for lunch, office workers face longer lines, and the community loses a familiar gathering spot. A sandwich that shrinks by just a few inches might seem insignificant, but multiplied across millions of meals a day, it becomes a warning sign of a shrinking ecosystem, and it leads to the inevitable question: who's next on the list of once too big to fail names? 7. Dairy Queen. Few brands are as deeply tied to North American summer memories as Dairy Queen. The gentle chill of soft serve, those upside-down blizzard cups, like a sweet little ritual. These treats used to be rewards after school, after a picnic, or simply after a long, hot day. But now across many parts of Canada, that feeling is starting to fade, not because the product has lost its taste, but because people just don't feel like coming back. A report from the Canadian Consumer Council revealed that among US-based dessert chains, Dairy Queen has been the most frequently replaced by local artisan ice cream shops. There's no public outcry, no boycotts, just a quiet act of non-choice. And for a brand that thrives on emotional connection, that's the most frightening kind of abandonment. The decline in foot traffic across Canada has forced the brand to scale back. Some locations in Quebec and British Columbia have shortened their business hours, while franchises in Saskatchewan are no longer receiving the same promotional support as before. All of this is setting off a worrying domino effect across the US-based supply chain, which still provides the core ingredients, advertising materials, and refrigeration equipment. In a small town in Iowa, the factory that produces flavored syrups for Dairy Queen is now at risk of shutting down its third production line following a nearly 40% drop in Canadian orders. In Colorado, a company that specializes in commercial ice cream machines reported its first quarterly loss in over 12 years, largely due to contracts being delayed indefinitely. And it doesn't stop there. Dairy Queen's franchise model, which relies on stable profits across multiple markets, is now under pressure as U.S. branches are forced to shoulder the shortfall from the north. This has led franchisees in states like Michigan and Wisconsin to start cutting staff, freezing expansion plans, and even selling off store ownership just to prevent deeper losses. But perhaps the saddest part: a brand once symbolic of simple joys has now become a symbol of how easily something can be let go when trust quietly slips away. And if you think only sweet, nostalgic foods are taking the hit, just wait until you see what's happening to a chain built on spice heat and explosive flavors, slowly losing the fire that once made it irresistible. 8. Chipotle. In Canada, Chipotle once burst onto the scene like a breath of fresh air, fast, healthy, fresh, and personalized. It stood apart from traditional fast food. No deep frying, no flashy colors, just simple rice bowls, burritos wrapped in foil, catering to a younger generation that wanted things streamlined yet still stylish. But in 2025, something cracked. In major urban centers like Toronto, Calgary, and Montreal, Chipotle has fallen from its top spot on the lunchtime list. Canadians aren't logging on to call for a boycott. They're doing just one thing, not walking in anymore. There's a discomfort eating at an American brand. That's the phrase many Canadians repeated in community surveys, not because the food got worse, but because they felt a need to prioritize something more local, more familiar, a decision rooted less in taste and more in principle. That quiet withdrawal has caused a visible dip in Chipotle's Canadian sales. Many locations report a 25% drop in customer traffic compared to the same period last year. In Vancouver, one store in an upscale neighborhood had to shut its doors on weekdays, and what few notice is that these decisions are echoing directly into the US economy. Chipotle doesn't operate independently in Canada. Its branding, packaging, and ingredient sourcing are all directed from its US headquarters. So when northern revenues shrink, factories in California, Texas, and Illinois are immediately hit with order cutbacks. A biodegradable packaging company in Indiana, which supplies burrito boxes, just saw 3 long-term contracts canceled. A vegetable farm in Arizona reported a steep decline in shipments to Canadian partners. A cold chain logistics company in Utah has repurposed half its fleet, now delivering pets instead of produce. Why? Because when Canadians quietly say no, Americans who had nothing to do with the decision end up paying the price. Jobs lost, prices up, services trimmed. And it all starts from one silent action. And if a chain that once stood for youth innovation and personal choice can't protect itself from that quiet wave, then what happens to a brand built on pure, unapologetic American identity? Can it survive much longer? 9. Five Guys. To Canadian food lovers, Five Guys once stood for real quality, real flavor, no frills, no gimmicks. Every burger came hefty fries cooked in peanut oil served in grease-stained paper bags, simple but honest. But in an era where trust is often judged by origin, that honesty no longer seems enough to keep Canadian diners coming back. Today, more and more Canadians are asking a tough question. Why does a single burger meal cost twice as much as a local eatery when the profits don't even stay in the country? That question has quietly rippled across consumer communities, creating a silent wave of desertion, not through protests or boycotts, but through everyday choices. In Calgary, a major shopping center took down its Five Guys sign after its lease expired and chose not to renew. In provinces like Manitoba and Nova Scotia, some branches now close on Mondays due to a sharp decline in foot traffic. Unlike large-scale franchises, Five Guys operates under a tightly centralized model managed directly from its US headquarters, meaning any drop in Canadian performance sends immediate shockwaves back to the US. At a specialized potato processing facility in Idaho, where potatoes are handpicked to meet Five Guys standards, one part of the production line has been paused due to slashed orders. A paper bag printing plant in North Carolina, known for producing the chain's iconic red logo bags, just shut down its night shift because there aren't enough contracts to stay open. And in the US, stores are struggling under the weight of rising input costs while customer volume remains flat. Some locations have quietly reduced fry portions, a move once considered a betrayal of the brand's identity. In Ohio, one branch has shifted its hours, operating just 5 days a week instead of 7. American customers are slowly realizing every time the combo price goes up, they're not just paying for food, they're subsidizing the losses from a market once believed to be safe. Five Guys isn't collapsing due to scandal. It's cracking from the inside because no one expected the quiet withdrawal of their northern neighbor to carry such weight. And if a bold, flavor-packed burger can no longer command loyalty, what about the world-famous crispy chicken that once had people lining up around the globe? Can it survive the economic chill now drifting down from the North 10? Popeyes. The boycott of American goods is no longer just a topic for debate, it has quietly become a habit in consumer behavior. Popeyes, a brand synonymous with the flavors of the American South, is one of the clearest victims. No protests, no hashtags. Canadians simply don't come back. In many areas like the Greater Toronto Area and the Vancouver metropolitan region, check-ins at Popeyes locations have steadily declined. On local consumer forums, people discuss less American options, supporting local and backing small businesses as a way to show social responsibility. This decline has had a tangible impact. The chain has had to reduce operating hours in some areas and close underperforming branches. But what's noteworthy is that the consequences do not stop at Canada's borders. Chicken meat, spices, packaging, marketing campaigns, logistics, data processing, everything is operated out of southern US states. When sales in Canada drop, domestic producers immediately feel the shock. Fewer orders interrupted production schedules, canceled advertising contracts mid-campaign. In Louisiana, the main supplier of Popeyes seasoning, many workers have to rotate shifts or take time off. At a packaging plant in Alabama, the night shift was cut because orders were no longer enough to maintain production. Even cross-border logistics centers have started to reduce weekly trips. American consumers are unaware that their fried chicken meals are now more expensive, not only because of inflation, but because the northern market no longer functions as before. And when part of the revenue stream is cut off, the burden is quietly redistributed onto American consumers' bills, those who had no part in the decision to turn away. Popeyes isn't disappearing, but its presence is no longer as strong as it once was. And with each American brand losing ground in Canada, the only certainty is that someone in the US will pay the price silently and alone. 10 fast food chains, 10 brands once deeply embedded in North American consumer culture are now gradually retreating from the Canadian market, not because of quality loss, but because of lost trust. Is this just a short-term slip in the food industry, or a clear signal that an entire American-style consumption model is being challenged by the very people who once supported it? This video does not encourage division or boycott. All content is presented with the purpose of exploration, analysis, and sparking discussion based on current events and consumer trends. We respect the principles of the market economy and all federal regulations. If you found this video helpful in understanding what's quietly happening around you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss upcoming stories where we uncover what mainstream media often overlooks.